There's something wealthy women rarely say out loud. They know it, practice it every day, but prefer to keep it quiet. Not because it's some impossible secret, but because most people still aren't ready to see it. I wasn't either. I kept chasing more and more income, but the money always slipped away fast. It was as if it was never enough, and I kept wondering, what's the rule that keeps these women so steady, while I'm always running behind? That's when I realized there's a financial rule that separates the ones who only look the part from the ones who truly grow. It's not hidden in complicated spreadsheets or magic formulas, but in consistent, almost invisible actions. And that's what I want to talk about. I'll show you 10 practical moves born from this silent rule, steps that reshaped how I see money, and that could make 2026 the year your financial freedom starts to take form. So hit that like button and subscribe, because each move you'll hear here is a piece of the puzzle that wealthy women quietly follow. The first thing I learned by observing them is that the game is not about how much you make, but how much you keep. While many rush to show off quick wins, a new car, a trip bought on credit, expensive clothes, they seem far more interested in one simple question: what will stay? That's the starting point of the silent rule. Earning can be temporary, but keeping is what sustains. They see every dollar that comes in as a seed. Part can be enjoyed, but another part must be planted. And that's where the real difference is born, between those always running and those who build steadily. Once I understood this, I realized it wasn't enough to just increase my income. If I didn't change how I kept and multiplied money, I'd stay stuck in the same loop. That was the foundation, and from it came the 10 moves I'll share with you now. Each one is a concrete practice, an identity decision, that turns this rule into reality. Comment: I keep to grow. If you already understand that wealth is not about running, it's about sustaining. Move 1. I turned my paycheck from a trophy into a seed. At the start of my financial life, every paycheck felt like a victory. It was like I'd won a race every month and wanted to celebrate by proving to myself that I was getting ahead in life. That was my mistake, treating my paycheck as a trophy instead of a tool. I spent like someone celebrating, like someone who needed to prove that all the effort had been worth it. I bought things to compensate for stress, to feel included, to not feel left behind, and in the end I always felt the same. I worked, I got paid, I spent, and nothing changed. The turning point was when I started seeing my paycheck as a seed. Every dollar could be planted in something that would grow, or buried in something that would disappear. That mindset pulled me out of the cycle of instant compensation and placed me in the cycle of building. Now, when money comes in, my first question isn't, what am I going to buy? But how can this amount multiply for me? Part of it goes to consumption, of course, but priority goes to planting, investments, savings, education, experiences that increase my value. And you know what's funny? Over time, I realized the feeling of security is far more satisfying than the rush of a momentary purchase. By planting, I harvest more freedom, more options, and more confidence in myself. Comment: my paycheck is a seed, not a trophy. If you've also decided to change how you deal with what you earn. Move 2. I built the habit of paying myself. When my paycheck came in, I immediately started distributing it. Rent, bills, credit card, emergencies, and only after that, if anything was left, I thought about myself. In practice, nothing was ever left. I always put myself last, as if my life was only about managing everyone else's urgencies. But when I watched how wealthy women handled their money, I noticed something simple, yet powerful. They always pay themselves first. It doesn't matter the amount. It doesn't matter the timing. A portion of money always goes to them before any bill gets paid. At first, this felt impossible to me. How can I pay myself first if I can barely cover my bills? But I understood it wasn't about quantity. It was about priority. I started with 5%, then 10%. And little by little, it became a law in my life. The money I set aside for myself is non-negotiable. This practice changes how you see yourself. You stop being a survivor who always depends on leftovers and become a builder, someone who strengthens herself above all else. It's a silent act, but it creates a solid foundation for everything else. Now, whenever money comes in, I know the first slice is my future thanking my present. This simple habit pulled me out of the scarcity mindset and gave me clarity on who's in charge. Me. Comment: I pay myself first. If you've also decided to make yourself the priority in your own financial life. Move 3. I turned spending into conscious choices, not an escape valve. I didn't realize it, but many of my purchases weren't about need or real desire. They were anesthesia. A new pair of shoes when I felt insecure. An expensive dinner when the week had been tough. Little treats that acted like escape valves for emotions I didn't want to face. For a few minutes, they seemed to work. I felt strong, happy, included. But as soon as the bill arrived, guilt replaced the euphoria. It was a cycle. I spent to feel relief, and I got into debt to punish myself. When I observed the consumption habits of truly wealthy women, I noticed something very different. They don't buy to numb themselves. They buy to strengthen themselves. Every expense has intention. If it's clothes, it communicates power. If it's a trip, it fuels experiences. If it's a course, it multiplies value. There's no escape, there's strategy. I had to reprogram how I looked at money. Before buying, I started asking myself, does this bring me closer to or further from the woman I want to be? And that question changed everything. I didn't stop spending, but I started choosing. The pleasure is no longer in accumulating things, but in aligning my money with the identity I'm building. Now every choice carries awareness. And in the end, I realized that spending less isn't sacrifice. It's power. Comment: my money follows my identity. If you're also choosing to spend to grow, not to hide. Move 4. I traded debt for silent wealth. There was a time when my life revolved around debt. I financed everything, from clothes I barely wore to the trendy phone that, deep down, didn't change a thing in my life. It felt like I was always paying for the past, while the present slipped away and the future never arrived. That was the trap. Believing debt was normal. But when I started observing truly wealthy women, I noticed a pattern. They don't take on debt to prove anything. If they use credit, it's strategic, always to multiply, never to imprison themselves. It was tough to face the fact that every installment I took on to keep up appearances was actually delaying my freedom by years. So I flipped the game. Every dollar that used to go to interest started going into assets. Little by little, silently, I began trading consumer payments for contributions to simple, safe, but consistent investments. At first it felt small, but over time, I realized that small grew, while the small debts I once thought harmless had been silently draining me. What used to be a cycle of suffocation turned into a cycle of expansion. And no one had to see it, no one had to applaud, because silent wealth doesn't need external approval. It gives you something far more valuable: peace. Comment: my money builds, it doesn't trap me, if you've also decided to trade debt for wealth. Move 5. I made my emergency fund, my ally of freedom. Before, I saw an emergency fund as something distant, almost impossible. It sounded like advice from finance books, or from people who already had plenty of money left over. I'd say, when I earn more, then I'll save. But that day never came, because there was always an urgency, always some unexpected expense that left me at zero, or in the red. Things only began to change when I decided to flip the logic. I realized that an emergency fund isn't a luxury, it's a foundation. It's not there to make me rich, but to keep me free. Because a woman without an emergency fund is at the mercy of her boss, her relationship, her family, her circumstances. Without a financial base, you end up accepting situations that drain your energy, simply because you can't choose otherwise. I started small, 10, 20, whatever was possible, and little by little that amount grew. It didn't matter if it was still small. What mattered was that it existed, a concrete sign that month by month I was shielding myself. The effect was immediate. Anxiety went down. Dependence broke. Clarity grew. Because it's not just about having money saved. It's about having the margin to say no when needed. Today, my emergency fund is my silent shield. It doesn't show up in photos, but it supports all of my choices. Comment: my freedom begins with my emergency fund. If you've understood that security is not a luxury, it's silent power. Move 6. I created multiple streams of income, even starting. Small. One of the biggest mistakes I made was believing my salary was enough. I clung to it as if it was my only ground. And at the same time, my biggest limit. If my job was stable, I could breathe. If anything wobbled, I panicked. Living like that was like walking on thin ice. At any moment, everything could crack. Watching wealthy women, I realized, they never depend on a single source. Even when they already have plenty, they diversify. They might own businesses, investments, royalties, consulting. But the principle is always the same. Never put all the eggs in one basket. So I applied that mindset to my own reality. I didn't start by creating something huge, but something doable. I sold simple services, explored skills I already had, invested in knowledge that could generate returns. Each small source of income was another door opening. And something curious happened. When I stopped depending on just one stream, I changed internally too. The feeling of fragility was replaced by confidence. Even if one stream weakened, others held strong. That silent diversity became both my safety net and my growth ladder. Now I understand that multiple incomes aren't a luxury. They're a survival strategy for anyone who wants to live unchained. Comment: I opened new streams. If you've also realized that freedom comes from having multiple paths, not from depending on just one. Move 7. I learned to shield my wealth in silence. Building is important, but protecting is indispensable. It took me a while to understand that. While I was focused only on increasing my income, I didn't see that without protection. Any unexpected event could wipe out years of effort. A lawsuit, a crisis, a messy breakup, an unexpected illness. Any of these can dismantle a financial life if it isn't shielded. Watching truly wealthy women, I realized they build in silence, but they shield with even more silence. They don't show contracts. They don't expose their assets. They don't go into details about what they own. They create invisible barriers that keep their wealth safe from unnecessary risks. I started small, but I started. I organized basic insurance, reviewed contracts, understood the importance of separating personal and business accounts, and sought out structures that protect against unfair debts. At first, it felt like bureaucracy, but soon I realized this was one of the greatest forms of freedom, not having to live in fear of losing everything overnight. Now I know shielding isn't about distrust. It's about care. It's about valuing what's already been achieved. And above all, it's about not letting external factors decide the fate of what took me so long to build. True wealth isn't just about earning or accumulating. It's about making sure what you build doesn't vanish with the first storm. Comment: I shield what I build, if you've understood that true wealth needs strong roots. Move 8. I made knowledge my greatest asset. I once believed that investing in myself was a waste. Books, courses, mentorships, all of it seemed too expensive compared to my monthly bills. So I preferred to spend on visible things, clothes, gadgets, thinking they'd make me feel better. The problem? None of it multiplied. And I stayed in the same place, with the same limited mindset, trying to solve old problems with the same old tools. When I began observing wealthy women, I noticed a pattern. They treat knowledge as the most valuable asset. They know that before multiplying money, they need to multiply vision. And they're not afraid to invest in information that can bring returns for a lifetime. I decided to test it. Instead of financing an object I'd forget in a few months, I invested in a course. The learning opened an opportunity that generated far more than the original amount. And that was just the first time. Every investment in myself became a new key for doors that once seemed locked. The most powerful part is this: no one can take away what you learn. A bag, a car, a house, they can all be lost. But the mindset, the skills, the clarity, they stay with you in any scenario. Now, before spending, I always ask, does this lose value over time or give me value forever? That shift grew my wealth, and more importantly, exploded my confidence. Comment: my knowledge is my asset, if you've also decided to invest in yourself before anything else. Move 9. I made silence my most powerful strategy. In the past, I felt the need to talk about every achievement. If I managed to save, I mentioned it. If I made an investment, I shared it, as if external validation was more important than the building itself. The problem is, when you expose too much, you open space for judgment, comparison, and often even envy. And without realizing it, you start making decisions to show off, not to grow. Watching wealthy women, I saw that silence is one of their strongest weapons. They don't announce their moves. They don't broadcast their plans. They don't detail their strategies. They just live. While many waste energy talking, they spend energy building. I had to learn this in practice. The first time I chose silence, it felt almost empty. No one applauded, no one commented, no one knew. But at the same time, it was liberating. Silence gave me focus. Without needing to prove anything to anyone, I aligned my actions with my vision, not with others' expectations. Now I understand. Silence isn't isolation. It's strategy. It protects what I'm building, gives me clarity about what really matters, and prevents me from wasting energy trying to convince others of something only I need to believe. In the end, true wealth is silent. And that's the space where growth happens. Comment: I grow in silence, if you also believe the greatest results don't need to be announced, just lived. Move 10. Reprogramming my identity was the real secret. No habit would have lasted if I hadn't changed how I saw myself. For a long time, I carried the identity of someone who wasn't born to be rich, who had to settle for less, who believed stability was something for other people. And even when I tried to apply new behaviors, my mind kept pulling me back into old patterns. That's when I realized the money I have will never surpass the identity I carry. If I see myself as limited, I'll always create situations to confirm that limitation. But if I see myself as a builder of wealth, I start acting accordingly. That was the turning point. I stopped repeating phrases like, I can't, I'm not able, that's not for me. I began asking, what would a wealthy woman do in this situation? And little by little, I started answering with actions. It was no longer about waiting for a miracle. It was about adopting a new posture. This reprogramming wasn't instant. It required consistency, repetition, and patience. But each time I chose to act like the woman I wanted to become, I got closer to her. Until, at some point, I wasn't pretending anymore. I was her. Now I understand that wealth doesn't begin in the bank account. It begins in the mind. And the identity you choose to carry every single day determines whether your money will grow or vanish. Comment: I wear my new identity, if you've understood that wealth is, above all, a decision about who you choose to be. Reaching this point, maybe you've realized what took me a long time to see. Wealth doesn't come from luck or from some extraordinary event. It's built in silence, through small daily decisions that seem too simple to matter. But it's exactly that simplicity that sustains big transformations. I used to think I needed more opportunities, more money, more recognition. Now I see that what I really needed was to change how I positioned myself with money and with life. That's when I shifted, from wasting to keeping, from paying others first to paying myself, from consuming blindly to choosing consciously, from debt to wealth, from fragility to a safety net, from one income to many, from exposed to protected, from buying objects to investing in knowledge, from speaking to embracing silence, and finally, from limitation to a reprogrammed identity. It wasn't easy, but it was transformational. And you know what? This transformation doesn't depend on anyone but you. No one is going to hand you wealth on a silver platter, but starting today you can decide to write a new financial story, beginning with just one move, one habit, one choice. Over time, each step compounds, and one day you'll look back and barely recognize yourself. The gap between the woman you are today and the woman you want to become isn't luck or destiny. It's consistency. And consistency is a daily decision. If this video made sense to you, I want to know. Comment: I choose consistency, to affirm that your transformation has already begun. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with another woman you know who deserves this turning point too. Because wealth isn't just about money in the bank. It's about having the freedom to be who you were born to be.